everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And tonight, Jeff, we are talking about what is commonly referred to as sportsmanship.
Or has been referred to.
Has been referred to. And the first thing, of course, is, well, what's a reasonable non-gendered way to express that idea? And I would suggest just sporting, or that person is a sport, or fair play, a sense of fair play. Sport is play, a sense of fair play.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that our perhaps antiquated definition of sportsmanship, or at least the antiquated term of sportsmanship, the definition includes fair play, but is more, goes beyond simply fair play. Because fair play is just following the rules and respecting the boundaries and so on. And what we have always referred to as sportsmanship has to do a lot with respecting your opponent and showing dignity on the field and a certain amount of self-possession, losing graciously.
So in some sense, it's respectful, fair and respectful play.
Yes.
Which is not as succinct as sportsmanship.
No. Right.
But perhaps that's something that we can think about. Perhaps people watching this, listening to it, might have a suggestion.
Yeah, if there is as succinct and definitive a term out there that we are unaware of, that would be great. I'd also wonder if other people find that particularly noisome, that use of sportsmanship. If not, then it's a perfectly serviceable term that everybody understands.
Knightliness.
That works for us.
Yeah.
in our little milieu, that's kind of what we call it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So lacking a better term, I'm not going to stumble over another term during this discussion. I think we can use sportsmanship for it.
Okay. So let's begin with Jeff.
Let's begin with Jeff. Let's always begin with Jeff.
It's not like you provide an alternative.
No.
Yeah, but perhaps you have a beverage this evening.
Perhaps I do.
And perhaps you would care to share with us what that beverage is.
Well, I would. It's just a straight bourbon whiskey from the Woodinville Distillery, 90 proof. It's very nice. It's got a nice character and sweetness to it, like a good bourbon does. But it's just a straight bourbon whiskey. It has nothing else to recommend it, except that it just seems a good and reasonably priced version of its genre. So
good.
And you, sir, what are you indulging this evening?
I have I'm balancing. It almost looks like a stemmed martini glass this way.
Yeah.
But this is there we go. A Primitivo.
Oh yes.
And this is Grifone Primitivo. Grifone is a brand of wine that you can find at Trader Joe's. Very inexpensive wine, but certainly drinkable, palatable, tasty even. This went well with dinner, and I would recommend avoiding their $3 Chuck as its own wine.
It's gone up from $2.
It's gone up from $2.
Inflation's everywhere.
Yes, but it went up several years ago, and it's overpriced at that. It would be overpriced at twice the price, because it's some people, it has its fans, but it's really quite terrible. But this is very drinkable. So here's to you.
So cheers.
So
and thanks everyone for showing up.
Yep. So sportsmanship is taught, was taught, I think is still taught in school.
One hopes.
Yes. And there were several rules that went along with this. They mostly involve fair play, following the rules,
right? Showing
respect to your teammates, your opponents, the officials, the rules, the spectators. If you win, be a gracious winner. If you lose, be a gracious loser.
And the basic, at the very, very basics, don't cheat, and don't take it, and don't take advantage when. Don't take advantage of something that is outside the game itself.
Right. And so many stories. I know that we hold up in the Society for Creative Anachronism that we participate in, a sense of playing by the rules, but we have both over the years seen people cheating. And I remember years ago at a strategy meeting at a Penzagor, large event, where an ally from another kingdom some distance away advocated cheating to win at that particular point.
We were both there, straight up cheating.
Yes. And I said, I got up out of my chair. Well, eventually, I first said, we can't do that. And he said, why not? I said, it's not honorable. And he said, victory will be our honor. And I stood up and I said, victory without honor is not victory. And it was a heated moment. He didn't respect the rules. He didn't respect he summarized it with winning is victory will be our honor. Essentially, winning is everything.
Right.
And that is completely contrary to the idea of sportsmanship or knightliness or fair play, respectful fair play. And I was quite incensed by that.
Oh yeah, there were any number of us sitting around. At first, there was a sort of dumbstruck disbelief that wait, no, you can't be suggesting what you're suggesting, because nobody who holds your rank in the organization should be suggesting such a thing. So there are some,
for those who are familiar with the SCA, he was a duke, meaning he had reigned at least twice. He'd actually reigned more like 6 times. Was from a distant kingdom, and his king was present, and his king did not chastise him but made excuses for him, and that diminished any respect I'd had for either of them significantly.
Well, and our king handled it graciously, but was, like I said, in that zone of dumbstruck, what? You can't possibly have just suggested that. And I think allowed his counterpart, the person you're talking about, the king, to downplay it and let it go just to save the meeting blowing up entirely.
Yes. Not how either of us, and we've talked about this before, not how either of us would handle it if someone who essentially was subordinate to us had suggested cheating.
Right.
We would have chastised them severely and made them leave and think about what they had suggested. But by and large, it's rare, because the cheating like that and actually openly advocating for it is rare, and doing it is rare. We've seen it, but I've seen it in other sports. I've seen it a lot. We've all seen videos of the soccer player who
Throws himself to the ground.
throws himself to the ground in pretending to be injured so the other guy will get a penalty card.
Right. Or at least will stop play or something.
Um, I knew at one point fencers when I was a active, competitive modern fencer. I knew fencers from a well-respected, accomplished team with a renowned coach who were taught to use their non-sword holding hand to block the blade, but do so away from
the judge,
so it couldn't be seen.
Huh. Is this foil with lame?
Yeah.
So you can put your glove in to stop it from hitting the
yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
That was a long time ago. I don't think that sort of thing is as easy to do now. But we've seen certainly, I mean, one of the other things we've seen other than cheating, because cheating is certainly the first violation of sportsmanship, we've seen other things like gloating. Essentially,
now we're not
in the SCA, but in
modern sports.
We're more likely to see in what we do in the SCA, more likely to see you give someone a hand up and you shake and hug and congratulate each other and go share a beer or something.
And I think we can talk about that in another episode, but that's built into our social fabric that you know, the kinds of things we're going to be talking about in this episode are anathema to us in general in the SCA.
The poor sportsmanship is
yes.
The SCA.
Yes, the examples we're going to give of poor sportsmanship would get someone pretty quickly ostracized.
Yes,
in our sport. But yeah, so like I said, as growing up, when we were younger and involved in sort of school sports and organized stuff like that, sportsmanship was often talked about but I got varying levels of coaching in sportsmanship. One of the things that I found most refreshing and one of the biggest draws to the SCA was our attitude towards winning and winning the right way. And because when I played basketball in high school, I got in the ball and I was going down the sideline of the court and I had stepped out of bounds and the referee blew a whistle and my coach jumped off the bench. So what are you calling the whistle for? And he said out of bounds, and my coach was, he wasn't out of bounds. And I said, yeah, I was out of bounds. I said, yeah, I was. And my coach said, shut up and sit down. You're out. And he put somebody else in instead. And that was a lesson for me.
Yeah.
And it was close to the end of that season, and I didn't play for that coach anymore. But you see that kind of thing all the time, and it's not illegal if you can get away with it.
Exactly. And I saw that. I saw high school coaches advocate or give lip service to sportsmanship, but I saw the behavior of their players, particularly when they weren't playing, but with other people. And they were not respectful to people who were not players.
Right.
And that, I think, is a violation of the idea of sportsmanship as well. Talmar, our friend Talmar, has told an interesting, used basketball as an example of sportsmanship, saying that there's a basketball game, somebody's playing hard, they foul out of the game, they get a standing ovation because they played really hard. He said another way of looking at it is they violated the rules so many times they got kicked out of the game.
Well,
and that's another way of looking at it. That,
sure.
I
have a problem. I get all kinds of grief, but I don't watch professional hockey. I have no interest in professional hockey because fighting is built into the rules. And in no other sport can you start a fight and keep playing. They're just
get a penalty and sit down, have to sit down.
Yeah, take a break and you can come back in 5 minutes. Sit down, cool off. No, that's poor sportsmanship. That's that's
particularly in the National Hockey League, the professional National Hockey League. You don't see that in Olympic
I know it isn't
hockey.
Tolerated in college, and
right. You just don't see that. I remember many years ago, I went to the NCAA tennis championships and watched the men's finals. And this was on the campus of Notre Dame. And one of the finalists was Jimmy Connors, who went on to have a very successful professional tennis career. Well, I haven't thought about this in years. Connors was before McEnroe,
right,
who was a loudmouth whiner on the court. Yep. There was Connors. McEnroe made Connors look quiet and well behaved, but Connors was the bad boy of tennis at that time. And so this is the NCAA championship, and Connors is mouthing off, and he's complaining, and he's whining, and he's arguing every call. The athletic director of Notre Dame came over to him. Now, the athletic director at that time was a man named Ed Krause, whose nickname was Moose, Ed Moose Krause, former linebacker for Notre Dame.
Okay.
Huge guy. And he went over to Connors, picked him up by the front of the shirt, slammed him against the fence, and quietly read him the riot act about being
okay.
And then set him down, and Connors went back to playing and was well behaved. After that, he won because he didn't need to do that,
right,
to win. He's just trying hard. He just wants to win so much. Yeah,
he's passionate. He's passionate about his
passionate. Well, that doesn't make up for it. So
no, that doesn't cut it.
Yes, and everybody applauded because in the audience, because people were tired of listening to his crap. So this is a question that I wanted to get out of this was, where does this, look back to, I don't know, like the golden age of sport in this country, like maybe the 30s, 40s, maybe, with where sports heroes were heroes. They weren't just idols. They were supposed to be exemplars, and they were expected to be good sportsmen, and they were expected to be respectful, and they were, love your country and the flag and all. There was a whole mythology built around exceptional sports players. Yeah.
And that, they were expected to play hard, and they were, but guys like, for instance, let's draw a distinction between somebody like, I don't know, these are old, I'm going way back now, like somebody like Stan Musial and Ty Cobb.
Yes. Okay. I was thinking of Ty Cobb, and I remember in the movie Field of Dreams where the one player says, yeah, we didn't invite Cobb. Nobody liked that son of a bitch anyway.
Right.
Because Cobb would intentionally, he'd slide into a base intentionally with his spikes up, spike people.
Yeah. And he would sharpen his spikes.
Yeah.
Anecdotally infamous for sharpening his cleats.
Yeah. Whereas Stan the Man Musial or Hank Greenberg, who was, he was a great baseball player. He was a hero to the Jewish community.
Sure.
Because he was, particularly at the time he was playing. And when I was growing up, Sandy Koufax, who was the most successful pitcher in the major leagues for a few years, and was Jewish and didn't play on Yom Kippur. And just was, talk about a hero to a lot of people. That was,
now we know, of course, that guys like Babe Ruth, for instance, was a son of a bitch off the field, but they built this sort of mythology around him anyway. And on the field, he played it absolutely straight and said the right things and acted the way he was expected to act.
Babe Ruth made time for children, visited children in the hospital, did that sort of thing. So people are people. I was just watching a Ken Burns documentary about Thomas Jefferson, who was brilliant and accomplished and admirable in a lot of ways, and also not.
Right.
And I started watching one about Benjamin Franklin, who was brilliant and accomplished and also thoughtless to his family and unkind and self-centered. I mean, the people are complicated. So I think the larger idea, and something I heard coaches give lip service to, is that sportsmanship learned in sport transfers to the rest of your life.
So it was said.
So it was said. I've seen far too many examples of the contrary for that to be true. And what you said about your coach being upset with you for being honest, well, that's a lesson that's taken away too.
Yeah.
So
what I'm want to get to though is, at what point did it, and it probably there's no catalyst or incident I'm sure that we can point to, but over the several decades that we've watched sports and watching sports now, the concept of trash talking an opponent, the idea that some sports celebrities are celebrated for their bad attitude. It's something like Conor McGregor, for instance. I mean, he's a fighter, right? Yeah. This isn't a game where a fight breaks out and that's a loss of control. No, it's a fight. But Muhammad Ali was brash and made fun of his opponents.
Of course, when Muhammad Ali was doing it, he was doing it for a purpose. He did it with a certain sense of style anyway, his rhyming, his attitude, but also he was absolutely saying enough with the quiet, self-effacing, humble Black athlete. I'm here and I'm going to be out there about it and proud about it and big about it and everything. And that made him a hero as well to a lot of people, particularly Black people. It made him a hero to that, because he was, in the same way that Jackie Robinson was a hero for being the first, not just being the first, but enduring the abuse and succeeding. Muhammad Ali was a hero for not putting up with that because he didn't have to anymore. And
as a sort of a counter to Joe Louis, for instance, who
yeah,
had attempts on his life because he married a white woman. Wasn't that Joe Louis?
Joe Louis. I'm thinking of I don't think it was Joe Louis. I'm thinking of going way back, Jack Johnson in the bare knuckles era. There was a play and a movie starring the voice of Darth Vader.
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones. Sorry, I blanked on his name for a minute. As Jack Johnson, who was in the bare knuckles era, was that in the bare knuckles era? He was the world champion. He married a lived with a white woman. I don't know if they were legally married or able to be legally married, but
I may have spoken out of turn, but I thought it was Joe Louis. Doesn't matter. So now we see, well, you brought up just before we went live, we were talking about things like end zone celebrations.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And while I get there's a certain amount of theater and showmanship that goes on with a professional, football game, I didn't object to the end zone celebration thing so much. The NFL eventually got tired of it and stopped it, put a stop to it.
Well, they put a limit on how much of it you could do.
Well, it got out of hand. They were putting on, productions of Caesar Augustus, in the end zone. It was getting out of hand.
It was like recreating the second act of Cats.
Yeah.
Dance moves and
dance choreography
that were named after the player.
Yeah.
The Iggy Shuffle, I think, or I could have that wrong. But now I see similar celebrations after individual plays, after a tackle and somebody celebrating, even if they're losing, making
there's a lot of, I see that. I see a lot of, in a lot of sports, even like in what is supposed to be a non-contact sport like basketball, a lot of posing and fist and chest pounding when you make a decent play, or trying to assert some dominance over an opponent because you were able to put in a shot, and they couldn't guard you or whatever. To me, a professional athlete should be professional.
Yeah, they should
work.
And do your job, and it's I know that sort of celebration is disallowed in amateur sports, high school, college, that sort of thing. The team will get penalized for that. And that kind of excuse me, gloating is penalized. And even more so if you, say in football, you tackle somebody or knock them down, you stand over them. It's taunting. It's called taunting. And that is not allowed. I much prefer to see somebody professionally catch the ball, they run for a touchdown, they're happy about it, they respectfully give the ball back to the official, they go back with their team, then maybe the team congratulates them and they go on with their business.
Right.
They're professionals. Although I certainly joked on some occasions, like, finish some work or something. Stuck the landing.
Yeah.
But
well, making a joke about, a sort of a mundane activity.
Yes.
And, making a big celebration out of it. That's a joke. That's a lot of humor in that.
Right.
But, and certainly I have respect for someone who excels at a given physical skill, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's absolutely worth respecting and admiring if it's taken a certain amount of training and devotion to getting good at something. Sure. I don't think that I don't I think most professional athletes are overpaid. I shouldn't say most. I said there's a large number of overpaid athletes. But I know it's more complex than that. It's how much are they making for their team? You know, I know, I understand.
Yeah, if we wanted to talk about how the values of society are reflected in what individual professions, how individual professions are compensated, let's talk about teachers. Let's talk about nurses. Let's talk about people who, let's talk about the people who during the pandemic were considered essential workers.
Right.
But their pay hasn't kept up with inflation. And I don't mean just inflation at the moment. I mean inflation like the past 30, 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
That the minimum wage, if the minimum wage had kept up with rises in income productivity and inflation, the minimum wage would be 25, 30 bucks an hour. Right. So anyway, and inflation, if we wanted to talk about inflation, we should talk about the fact that corporate profits are at an all-time high. And so inflation is not being driven by people wanting to be paid for their work in a more reasonable way, but by companies doing stock buybacks, overpaying their executives, doing
inflation. Inflation is not being driven by a lack of commodity.
No.
It's not a supply and demand type thing. But anyway,
economics is another issue.
Yeah.
I think I see people arguing with referees, arguing with officials, arguing about calls. I see coaches do it. Coaches or managers, depending on the sport, and they're expected to do it.
Right.
They are expected to do it. I remember watching, it was something about baseball, where they said, and this is when the manager went out to argue with the referees, the umpires, about a call, but he wasn't actually arguing with them. He was saying, I have to come out here because my team expects me to argue, but I'm not arguing. Hey, how's your wife doing? Hey, are we still getting together for a barbecue on Saturday? Yeah, we are. But you know, you have to, if you keep doing this, I'm going to have to kick you out again. It's like, okay, I understand. But so
it's performative bad sportsmanship, right? It's
yes.
You know, that's even worse. Like, I'm expected to be a jerk about this, so I'm coming out here to act like a jerk. You know,
and I think in a lot of ways, for me, that the analogy is the use of profanity.
Okay.
I do not completely eschew the use of profanity. I consider it, as all language, to be a tool. So there are times when I will strategically or tactically sprinkle selected profanities into my speech for effect. But if I did it all the time, it would have less effect. It would have less impact. And someone who argues with the referee all the time, it has less impact. And I think it's actually counterproductive. I think referees, umpires are human, and they're just as likely to argue against or rule against someone who's arguing with them.
Well, nowadays sports have recourse to instant replay, and it's built into their rules now.
Well, some sports, but not all.
Not all. Well, baseball and
Yeah.
football, I think.
I have I was watching, this was a while ago, I think it may have been with the Olympics, watching fencing. And I have watched some modern sport fencing, and I admire the speed and precision and athleticism of fencers. And I really dislike the fact that after every touch, both fencers rip off their masks and scream. Yeah. As if they're trying to persuade the scoring system that they got to touch first.
Right.
It's noisy. It just it seems performative, as you said.
Yeah. And it takes away, I think in many ways, from the dignity of the sport.
Yes. And they should get off my lawn.
Yeah, okay. You know, I will recognize the fact that we grew up with a certain way of thinking and acting in public, and maybe that is no longer respected. That doesn't mean I've got to like it.
Yeah. Well, I will give one more example from the SCA, in that in that sport, the person who is struck, because it's simulated sort of, it's a martial sport, a medieval martial sport. And the person will use rattan weapons, and because they're safer than steel weapons or require less armor. Anyway, that's another discussion. But the person who is struck is the one who decides whether it was good enough, whether it was sufficient. And there have been, both of us have acted as safety officials, known as marshals, and had occasion to tell someone, particularly in a large group competition known as a melee, to point out to someone that they were struck, or point out to someone that they did something they weren't allowed to do, or pointed out to someone, and got an argument. And I said, okay, now you're arguing with the marshal, you're off the field.
Right.
I said, if you have a complaint, here's my name, find me afterwards, we'll go to my superior, we'll talk about it. But don't argue with me on the field. And we both had occasion to do that. So it's only in certain examples, certain instances, where a player arguing with a referee or an umpire gets tossed. They argue sometimes and they walk away. It's generally if they use profanity or if there's physical contact.
Right.
So you see this dance in baseball where the manager is like this close.
Yeah.
He's not physically touching.
Well, and back in the day, it was kicking dirt on their shoes.
Yes. Whereas I've also seen video of occasion, I think it was basketball, where the referee actually backed into a player and then threw out the player for touching them.
Yeah, right. And the player's like, what? But
it was the referee's fault. So.
Or a player in a football. I saw a football player, touchdown, no celebration, toss the football, like slow underhand toss to a referee who wasn't paying attention, and hit him in the chest, and he threw the player out. And like, oh, you were just embarrassed and you had to do something about it.
Well, because people are people, you know.
Yeah, right. And referees make mistakes too, and all that. But so getting back to my original question is, where, in your mind, when did you, or have you, I suspect you have, when did this start becoming a noticeable phenomenon for you?
The
lack of sportsmanship in sports.
Wow. I see it more in in team sports, in professional team sports, particularly.
Yeah, sure.
But
Although we're still seeing it, you brought up a couple of examples of like professional tennis.
yes. I think that was the first example, that story I mentioned about Jimmy Connors at the NCAA tennis championships. I think that was the first example, but that was viewed as an aberration.
Yeah.
You didn't see that sort of thing in professional sports until he started doing that in tennis. Then I'd have to, I don't remember. It just seems to have become so prevalent now. And trash talking, I know you mentioned Muhammad Ali, and I think there are people who tried to emulate that without his style, his panache.
Okay.
Later, because I don't remember seeing it before that. I do remember. I don't know if you remember the movie Bull Durham.
Sure.
Movie where a minor league pitcher who's really good, who's going to go to the majors if he
being groomed for his move up,
if he develops the control to do so, and he's being coached on how to talk to the media once he gets there.
Right.
And then you see him eventually makes it to the majors, and he's talking to the media, and he's doing, well, I'm just glad to be here and glad to be part of this team. And my team, I couldn't do it without my team. And I'm glad to be, it's such an honor. And every time I watch an interview now with a player, it's the same thing.
Sure. But at least that is giving a nod to,
it is.
It's not, you still see that, but it's sometimes you can see through, you can see that that's a very thin layer of sincerity, that you look at their performance on the field, and I don't mean performance as an athlete, but I mean the performance the acts that they perform on the field. You know what I mean? The show they put on, not their performance as an athlete, but the show that they put on, the way they display themselves is contrary to the humble attitude that is, portrayed in front of someone who's interviewing them.
Yes.
That this is very much something you were told to say, and it's you don't mean it. You're just saying it because this is something you're expected to say. Right.
And it makes me think of speeches at the Academy Awards when someone gets up and says, I want to say how honored I am to have been considered and be in the company of these other people whose work I so greatly respect. Not everybody says that. It's sort of expected, but maybe it's just that they're good actors, but it seems a lot more sincere when I hear it from them. So,
well, I think they're that the very best actors have spent a lot of their career learning,
yes,
to be good actors, and you can't do that in a vacuum.
Right.
And you certainly develop a certain amount of respect for your peers in that arena. I would say perhaps not so much for recording artists.
Yeah.
Kanye West comes to mind.
He's a jackass.
Yeah.
And
a self-convinced genius.
Yeah. Yeah. I've met people who are musicians, and that's another question I have. When did musicians and singers start being referred to as artists? I don't object. I mean, it is in that I'm not objecting in that it's not art, but there are lots of forms of art, but it lacks a certain specificity.
Okay.
So I don't know when that started happening and why it started happening. Perhaps when some performers stopped being musicians and singers. Um, but I don't know, but that's off topic. Um, I do think that the um, the notable feuds that have happened in music,
Oh yeah.
which I think are enhanced and magnified by the same sort of media that paparazzi belong to. I think that's
Well,
I think it's all consistent with things we've said about social media and how, as you said once, of somebody who was saying things on social media that if he said in a bar would get him punched in the nose. People do that, and I think in some ways that's infected a lot of it's social media is trash talking in too many ways.
oh, yes, true.
So I don't. So trash talking in sport probably came before social media,
Oh
but
yeah.
social media has magnified some of the worst of that.
Well, then I also think there is some influence from, I want, I want to call it professional. I can call it professional wrestling and people know what I mean, but it's not wrestling. It is professional. And the guys who do it have an athletic performance. I mean, what they're doing is the things a lot of them do are real. I mean, you can't fake jumping 10 feet in the air and landing on somebody, but there's a way to land on somebody without really hurting them. So there are skills they bring to bear to this performance.
It's entertainment. Is world wrestling entertainment.
Yes. But the whole performance that goes, the personalities and the, as you said, feuds and all that stuff, which are all manufactured, are built around it, but glamorizes for me that the worst part of sports.
And the good guys, bad guys sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember watching, I mean, it's changed enormously since I was a kid, since we watched
sure,
the
Iron Sheik
and the Vern Gagne, who was a wrestler, acrobatic wrestler in the 60s, who would do flips and stuff. Who they had there was real physical ability there, but
and there still is. But
there still is the stories of good guys and bad guys, and who cheats when they're tagging in, but then they don't tag out. They still both pile on somebody, and everybody except maybe little kids knows it's fake. It's the physicality is real, the athleticism is real.
Yes.
But the competitive nature, it's not competitive, it's scripted. But yeah, and that's trash talking. It's full of trash talking.
Right.
It's
50% trash talking.
Yeah, it's terrible example of sportsmanship. It is completely antithetical to it.
But as you said, little kids are the ones who buy it.
Yes.
And that's the tragedy of it to me. It's, and you can't, I don't know if parents won't tell them it's fake because it's like Santa Claus or something. I don't know.
I don't see little kids necessarily in the audience. Well, I haven't watched one of those things.
But you do. You don't see little kids. You don't see, 7 and 8 year olds, but you see young adolescents all over the place. They're the ones screaming the loudest with the biggest signs.
Okay. Well,
so I object to it in that sense, that there's no recognition. It's all, yeah, like I said, it's like Santa Claus. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement of it not being real, but there's no overt, look, this is a performance we're doing here. This is,
Yeah. I wonder if this relates in timing to the rise of the anti-hero, because as you said, in sports there were, sports heroes, and then there were in movies there were good guys and bad guys, but then there was the anti-hero, and
we did talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
I wonder if it would be right around the same time, the 60s, 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Well, but then there was a whole, the questioning of the establishment. And I would hate that trash talking became an outgrowth of what I would consider a positive sort of movement.
Well, you wouldn't see trash talking necessarily from certain, as a certain expression, as an expression of certain aspects of 60s counterculture. You'd see protesting. Sometimes that got to be not just putting a flower in a gun barrel, but
yeah, there's impolite language used.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, but you think of like, well, we talked about the hero and the anti-hero. The hero of the 50s and early 60s, never drew first. Never drew first, but never backed down.
Right.
That was the manly, heroic ideal, right? You never start a fight, but you finish it. That's, and in the, as the rise of the anti-hero was sort of I think there was still a kind of, well, we've talked about that to a large extent, about where Clint Eastwood came from in the spaghetti westerns and turning the Western hero on its head. But the anti-hero was the still never hit first. The anti-hero was more often the, I just want to be left alone.
Right.
But think about, drag me into this.
Think about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in that movie. And Butch Cassidy is challenged for leadership of the Hole in the Wall gang by, how was it?
Richard Keel.
Richard Keel. Ted Cassidy. Richard Keel?
Oh, no, you're right. No, you're right.
Cassidy, Ted Cassidy, who was Lurch in The Addams Family on TV, and questions him. And as Butch Cassidy, Paul Newman is approaching him, saying, okay, well, the first thing we have to do is talk about rules. And he says, rules?
In a knife fight?
and then Butch kicks him in the groin and says, yeah, there are no rules. And he walks away. So,
well, and before that, he goes to Robert Redford. Paul Newman goes to Robert Redford and says, if he wins, kill him. Yeah. And Robert Redford says, be a pleasure.
Yeah. And
but there's no,
and they are bank robbers and train robbers. Yeah. And so, and they die at the end of the movie. Spoiler. Spoiler for a 50-year-old movie.
1974, I believe.
74. Okay. So they die at the end of the movie. But they're that sort of anti-hero that because they're not good guys, they're actually bad guys. And there are all sorts of stories like that. Oh, they're robbed, but they don't kill people unnecessarily, and they're actually nice. And
well, this is the 20s stereotype bank robber also, where they were the heroes of the people because they only stole from banks who were cheating everyone anyway.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, because before Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, there was Bonnie and Clyde movie with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway.
Yep.
And
They died in the end too.
They
I
did.
mean, this is, and that's a absolutely purposely done in those movies, was that you sort of build them up as these characters that you can identify with, and then they die because they were bad.
Yeah, and that what used to be part of the movie code that would happen.
Right. But then you think about, we're wandering way afield here, but we think about like Ocean's 11 in the 60s.
Yep.
Where they kind of get away with it. They don't get caught. If I remember right, they don't get caught, but they don't get all the money either.
Or the Thomas Crown Affair.
Right. Yeah. But they're nobody in those movies, nobody gets hurt. Nobody gets shot. Nobody dies. And they're almost always stealing from a corrupt person or entity.
The TV show Leverage was all about
very modern
about that.
Yeah. That's very modern.
It is. Well, then the Italian Job was about that.
Same thing.
And lots of examples of it's okay to steal as long as you're stealing from the bad guys who are stealing from the people.
Right.
So it puts us, it's related to the topic of sportsmanship, which in a larger sense, good sportsmanship relates to honesty and respect and propriety and courtesy and justice, all of those virtues that I think we could say that sportsmanship is one way of codifying the knightly virtues in the arena of not just sport, competition.
Any competition.
Right.
I mean, as kids, we were taught to be nice when you lose a board game or win a board game, or it's not just in sports, but being a good sport, as you said, meant winning fairly and then not gloating,
right,
or losing fairly and congratulating the winner.
Right.
That's the kind of the basis, the core behaviors of a good sport.
Yep.
So,
and that takes a certain amount of self
humility,
humility that you
I lost. Okay. But you didn't win this time. Better luck next time.
Encouraging your opponent.
Yeah.
So
especially if they're a younger sibling.
Interesting. And I've commented that the idea of a critique, which we both had to go through in design and art, is not as well understood sometimes by some of my students who absolutely do not want to criticize each other, even in a helpful, positive way. They only want to say, hey, good job. So it makes getting them to discuss a topic very challenging when they won't disagree with each other about anything, even courteously. They just they'll say, hey, yeah, that was good.
Well, I think that this may be a whole other.
It's the opposite of trash talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even when they disagree, it's a sort of an insincere acknowledgement. But the idea that you can't, this is, like I say, this may be a whole other subject. The idea that everyone's opinion is worthwhile.
Oh,
right. Well, no, not every opinion is well. And the fact that what you're trying to teach them is there are absolute criteria that can be judged against. And it isn't personal. It's not about you as a person. You're not worthy because you didn't do this thing a particular way. He said there was a criteria that you were supposed to meet, and you met it with greater or lesser success, and in comparison to your peers.
Yep.
It's not
And
dehumanizing.
by the way, here's how you can make it better.
Right. Sure. Well, you're teaching them, right? That's the whole concept. Here's the thing. Here's an absolute performance measure. You did not meet it, but you failed because of this specific thing, and you can work on that specific thing so that you can meet the requirement next time. It's not personal. You shouldn't be traumatized by the fact that you didn't meet a criteria, because that's all it is. That's all I'm sure you're talking about.
Yeah. And I do recall having a professor who was abusive in critique. Right. And
that's certainly an issue.
It was an issue. It was an issue. Well, but then when I gave it right back to him, when I countered his abuse with, I reflected it back on him, he stopped doing it to me. And his excuse was that he was just teaching people how to toughen up so they could handle it out in the world. And it was bullshit. It was just an excuse for him to be abusive.
Yeah, it sounds like he was just a bully. And when you stood up to him, you weren't any fun anymore.
Exactly.
I had a design instructor when I was in school who was and it was a design class, right? But we mostly worked in a lot of black and white medium, because it was about design. It's composition and balance and contrast and those real basic concepts. But he was always he was a fine artist, or he defined himself as a fine artist. He would work in his studio and he would put things up in galleries. He didn't work for clients. He was an artist in that sense, that he worked for himself and he sold what he could. So he was a teacher in a graphic design program. And he was constantly telling everyone, and me in particular, to loosen up, get freer with your strokes, do this, don't worry about the edges, be loosen up, be freer, express yourself more. But he never told the people who essentially broke the parameters of the assignment to tighten up and stay within the assignment.
Right.
And I called him on that. I said, we're not training to be painters. We're not training to sell in galleries. We are training to work in magazines and newspapers. And we are training to be graphic designers, where your parameters are absolute. And you have to stay within certain guidelines and rules, or you won't, or you don't have a job.
Right.
And he said, well, I called him in that way. And he said, well, all of you are too straight. You'll have to learn how to break the rules so that you can stay within them and maintain your creativity. I'm like, okay, that's a good cover.
Yeah, but that's not the way you do it. You first learn the rules and you learn why they're there, and you learn how to apply them so that you can then go beyond them.
Right.
So yeah, that's a big subject too. So two things. One, I think we've not only exhausted the subject, we've ventured into other areas. And two, my wine glass is empty. So I think we're probably at a conclusion of this episode.
I think so. This is another one of those where we aren't coming up with any answers or solutions. It's just an observation that I would like people to think about when they watch sports or watch a celebrity act out, and particularly an athletic celebrity. We just did the slap last week. We don't have to go over that anymore.
Yeah, but certainly, yeah. Well, I knew I think we both knew athletes in school, in high school, who acted out, who didn't behave well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think that the ones who were good enough to make it into professional level sport just kept doing that.
If they,
Some of them.
yeah, if you were a jerk at 20, but you could run faster than anybody in your sport, you didn't have to stop being a jerk as long as you could keep running.
Right.
It's when you can't run anymore, when that won't serve you anymore, being a jerk is now you're worthless as a member of society.
Right. So, well, as I said, I think we've exhausted the subject. So thank you, everybody. Please like, follow, share. Please send us suggestions for topics you'd like us to discuss that relate to the chivalric virtues. Of course,
yes,
we pretty much think everything relates to the chivalric virtues.
Send us a problem you see in the world, and we'll see if we can't bend it to the chivalric virtues.
So, with that being said, until next time, be thou
a good knight
and true.